Hi guys, and welcome to a Hector Lecture guide to the UCoB phase Nael. This is the second video in a series of 5 videos breaking down the entirety of the Unending Coil of Bahamut's ultimate fight in Final Fantasy XIV. If you haven't watched my first video on how to do the Twin Tanya phase and still need help clearing that phase, I recommend watching that video first. Assuming you've dropped Twin to 0% to beat Twins in Rage, you want to stack your entire group ready for the transition in a Neuralink. What's going to happen is a pillar is about to fall down, causing a knockback and some pretty heavy damage, so make sure to shield and mitigate accordingly. You want to make sure you're not too close to the pillar because the damage increases the closer you are to the pillar as it falls down, but if you're too close to the edge, you will get knocked back into the wall of death and instantly die. Immediately afterwards, we get these sort of shocking AoE patterns appear on the ground, and we're about to be targeted with some different meteor stream spread AoEs, so the party just needs to spread. There's a lot of time to move into these, so no rush. 4 random players will get targeted with meteor stream AoEs, and the first set of electric AoEs will explode. Now the pattern's going to swap, and you just need to have your whole party rotate one direction or the other. Again, still spread out because now the other 4 players will be targeted with the meteor streams, and then the last thunder AoEs will explode. Be aware, if anybody's dead at the start of this phase, then one player will receive 2 AoEs, a tank can survive, but any other player will need either significant healing or they will die from the second. Immediately after this goes, the boss is going to target the current tank, whoever was tanking at the end of Twin phase, with a Dalmid dive. This is a hard-hitting tank buster that cleaves. Just as this happens, the blue pillar will disappear. Be aware, up until then, if you'd walked through that pillar, it was instant death, but now that it's gone, the whole party can join over by the off-tank. Immediately, the boss is going to target the off-tank with a untelegraphed tank buster, Bahamut's Claw. This hits 5 times with pretty hard hits each time, so mitigate. One suggestion here is because that one tank is going to take both the Dalmid Dive Tank Buster and the Bahamut's Claw back to back, this is a great chance to use your invuln to give your healers a little bit of respite. Immediately afterwards, I recommend pulling the boss towards the middle away from any Neuralinks. The Neuralinks are not necessary for any mechanics, but you do less damage when you're stood in one, so you don't want any of your players to accidentally wander into one while dodging mechanics. The boss will cast Bahamut's Favor, which gives them a damage up buff, and spawns these 5 dragons around the arena. Now, these dragons can only appear on cardinals or intercardinals, but where the 5 of them spawn is totally random. You could potentially get all 5 of them spawning on one half of the arena. Good news is, where they spawn only matters for one mechanic later in the fight, and with the waymarks you see here, we're going to hopefully be able to completely ignore them. Now, Nael phase is tricky. None of the mechanics are particularly difficult. They're all very simple on their face. What makes Nael so difficult is that they're stacked together at an incredibly fast pace, unlike really anything else not ultimate in the game. Let's break down each of these individual mechanics so you can see the basics, and then we can put them together as they show in the order of the fight. The first mechanic we get is quotes. This is the trademark Nael mechanic. Nael will give a quote. It'll say something like, "Oh, hallowed moon, take fire and scorch my enemies." And hidden within that quote are 2 key phrases that hint at the 2 mechanics that are going to show up. In this case, hallowed moon and fire. Not only do we now know the mechanics, but also the order, that the hallowed moon happens before the fire. So what do hallowed moon and fire mean? Here are all the possible key phrases. If you see hallowed moon, this is a lunar dynamo, which is a donut-shaped AoE, so you need to be near the boss. It's slightly larger than the boss's hitbox, so there's some room outside of the hitbox. Iron is the hint that the boss is about to perform Iron Chariot, which is an out. Be aware, both Lunar Dynamo and Iron Chariot, in addition to killing any player hit, will also actually heal Nael slightly, so very important to dodge these. Any word resembling fire, this could be scorched, burning, that's the hint that you have a thermionic beam stack. Everybody needs to be together ready to soak that. Descend is the hint that you're going to get a Raven's Dive spread. This is the boss jump onto a random player, and this will kill any player that is too near to that player, so you need to do a light spread. Stars hints that we're going to get the same meteor stream spread that we saw at the beginning, so 4 random players targeted for big damage. And lastly, Red Moon tells you that the current tank is going to be targeted with a Dalmid Dive Tank Buster. Again, this cleaves, so make sure no one else is near them, or they will almost certainly die. When you put it all together, you see the quote, you see the two key phrases, Hollowed Moon, so an in, fire, then a stack. Once the quote disappears, a second later, the first mechanic goes off, and then shortly after, the second mechanic. That's quotes. Next mechanic you see through Nael phase is the Thunders. At different points in times, two random players are going to get targeted with this Thunderstruck debuff that will always start with 5 seconds. At the end of this debuff, when it counts down to 0, they explode in an AoE around them. In addition to doing major damage to anyone hit, another player hit by this is going to be given an unassumable paralysis debuff. This lasts for upwards of 45 seconds and is incredible pain to do the fight with, and in some cases is just a straight-up death sentence. So be very careful not to clip anyone with your Thunder debuff. Next up is Fire, Ice. Throughout this phase, there are going to be different mechanics that cause you to either be given the Ice Bitten or Fire Scorched debuff. And you can think of it like this as sort of a sliding scale of temperature. If you get hit by one of the ice balls, you get an Ice Bitten. If you get hit again, you would get too cold and would die. If you take a Fire Tether, you get Fire Scorched. And if you take another one while Fire Scorched, you would die. You need to keep your temperature in between that. Now, how this works, more or less randomly, players are going to get targeted one at a time by ice balls by one of the dragon, which will give them the Ice Bitten debuff. They're random, but they're not. Every player is going to get targeted before anyone is targeted a second time, but in that first set of 8, the order of who is targeted when is totally random. However, you're guaranteed to get targeted by these 3 times throughout the entirety of the phase. To counter this, at 4 points in the phase, someone is going to be targeted with one of these fire tethers. When the tether expires, it causes a tiny little very light AoE around the party, and it causes everyone to slide 1 step up on the heat scale. So if you had the Ice Bitten debuff, you'll go back to having nothing. If you didn't have a debuff, you'll go up to having Fire Scorched. And if you already had Fire Scorched, that fire stack there would have killed you. Now, this seems like it could be confusing, that you have to pay really close attention to do you have ice or do you have fire and decide whether or not to be near the fire tether or not, but there's some very simple solutions to this. I'm going to show you one. This is the in-out, in-in method. The way this works is the first fire tether, the entire party makes sure they're in it. For the second fire tether, whoever is targeted goes away from the party. This one is taken out. For the third fire tether, everyone's going to take it in except for whoever took the second tether out. If they take this one, they're going to get too hot, they will die. And then finally, for the fourth tether, everyone can take this in. This works perfectly every time if you have no deaths. If at any point in time someone deaths, this speeds up the rate at which you get hit by the ice balls, and therefore the rate in which people are getting the ice bitten. If that happens, everything's out the window. You do have to pay attention to your debuffs and look whether or not you need to take one. As a general rule, if you have ice bitten, you definitely need to take the fire tether. If you have no debuff, you might need to take the fire tether. It's tricky. So, simplest solution, don't die. The final mechanic to deal with is Doom. Throughout the fight, at different points in times, 3 or 2 players are going to get targeted with a Doom debuff with either a 5, 10, or 15-second timer. All 3 Dooms appear at the same time, and around the same time, you're going to see light puddles appear under a random player in the party. Dodge out of those, a second later they're going to explode, and to try to keep this tight and so you don't have to wonder where these light puddles are, I recommend having the party try to move roughly in a clockwise circle around the boss while dealing with these light puddles. After it explodes, assuming nobody's in it and dies from standing in it, there's a light puddle underneath. Now, walking into that light puddle will cleanse your Doom debuff. The player with the shortest timer, the 5-second timer, needs to be the one who goes into this first one. Otherwise, they won't have time to be able to cleanse their debuff and will be killed by it. Another light puddle will appear, just keep dodging clockwise, and the 10-second timer is going to cleanse now. And the third puddle appears, keep rotating, and the 15-second timer is going to cleanse here. Now, that's all of the mechanics. What makes this phase so tricky is how they're stacked together. I'm going to break this down into how I see it as 3 combos split up by mini tankbusters that are a little second to breathe in between the very rapid pace of all the mechanics. So the first combo works like this. You get a thunder, into a quote, into a fire, into a doom. It looks like this. 2 players are going to get the thunder, and Nael is going to reveal the first quote. These are the 2 possibilities for that first quote. To simplify it down, you are always going to get a Hallowed Moon in, and then it's followed by either an out or a stack. Because we're dealing with the thunders at the same time as the in part, the thunders can only spread out to the corners of Nael, sort of making a Mickey Mouse shape with the rest of the party stacked behind the boss. The thunders go off at the same time as the in, and now we deal with the second part of the quote. We'll say it was an out this time, but it could have been a stack. Next up is to deal with the fire tether, so everybody's going to go in near the boss to stack together to soak this, as it's the in. And now is the dooms. 2 players will have doom. The 5-second debuff cleanses first. And the 10-second debuff is going to cleanse next. Take a deep breath. You've dealt with the first combo. The main tank should mitigate right now because they're about to get targeted with another one of those Bahamut's Claw mini tank busters. And you'll see a fire tether appear, signifying the start of the second combo. This is fire into thunder into a quote, into doom into thunder into fire. Really important you know, is it the fire to deal with first or the thunder to deal with first? So you know, do I go out immediately with my thunder or do I wait for the fire first? In this case, first the fire tether, whoever gets the second one, takes this out. This is the out fire tether. The thunders will appear, and they can immediately go out away from the party, ready to explode. You'll see the next quote, though the thunders will explode before any of this. These are the 2 possible quotes, but importantly, simplified down, it's always a stack followed by an in or an out. Let your thunder debuffs explode first, then those players can join the party for the stack, and then do the next mechanic either in or out from the quote. In this case, I'll show you the in. About this time, the doom puddles start to appear. Check your debuff to see whether or not you have doom, and if it's 5, 10, or 15 seconds. The 5-second cleanses. The party rotates. The 10-second gets ready to cleanse. Right about here is where those thunders appear. If you see you've got the thunder debuff, you need to get away from the party and away from where the party's about to rotate to. So nobody should go near 2, because that's where the party's about to head towards. Right about here, the thunders are going to explode. And now everybody wants to get in for the fire tether other than H2, who was the second fire tether. They're going to take this out. I recommend having the fire tether go near to the third puddle so that person can soak it if they need or dodge if they need to. With that done, take a deep breath, have your main tank pop some cooldowns because you've got another Bahamut's Claw mini tank buster to prepare yourself for the third combo of mechanics. This one's a bit easier than the second combo. It's just a quote, into fire, into thunder, into doom. Really important for this one to remember that it's fire into thunder, and your thunders should wait for the fire before going out. Everybody's going to pre-spread because these are the 2 possible quotes, and if we simplify it down, you are guaranteed to get a Raven's Dive spread with either an in or an out. Important, don't spread too far away. It's a very, very small AoE. You don't need to be too far spread out, and if any one player is too far away and they're targeted for the Raven's Dive, if it's an in afterwards, the party might not be able to get there and will get clipped by the Lunar Dynamo. So do a light spread. Here I'm going to show you spread into out. A player's targeted, and now everybody gets away for the second part of the quote, the out. We want to take this fire tether in, but you'll see the thunder debuffs appear. These players need to be patient. They need to wait a second, soak the fire, and then immediately get out. You can see that M1 and H1 are kind of cheating where they're going to spread towards, but if you're on voice chat, you can call out where you're planning on going so that everybody else can avoid it. Again, there's going to be dooms with this, so think the party is going to rotate towards 1. You don't want to drop your thunder that way. Go somewhere else. As soon as the fire goes, the thunders get out, the party dodges the doom light puddle, and now all that's left is to deal with the 3 dooms. Check your debuff, have 5-second cleanse, 10-second cleanse, and finally 15 seconds cleanse. You might want to pull the boss more middle away from the Neuralinks and prepare for Raven's Beak. This is a very heavy-hitting tank buster that also includes a piercing vulnerability up, which means that it requires a tank swap. Don't worry, this doesn't cleave, but it does hit very hard, so prepare for some pretty significant mitigation and necessary healing on that tank. Now we enter the final real phase of this fight, and this can be a make-or-break mechanic. This is Divebombs. Divebombs are always paired with one of the following quotes. Again, simplified, you are either going to get the Dalma Dive Tank Buster into a Thermionic Beam stack, or a Meteor Stream spread followed by that Dalma Dive Tank Buster. What this means is, while the order's a little bit finicky, the current main tank needs to stay away from the party because they're going to get targeted with Dalma Dive, and the rest of the party needs to look at the quote to see, are they stacking or spreading? This isn't going to go off for a while, but remember it for now. About here is when the first dive bomb marker appears. The way these work, in short, is that the dive bomb markers are going to appear as 1, 2, and 3 markers. The first dive bomb marker, wherever this player drops it, the first 2 dragons are going to target there later for a dive bomb. By first 2 dragons, I mean start by north and then rotate clockwise. If there's a dragon north, that's the first dragon. If there's not, the first 2 dragons clockwise are dragons 1 and 2. In this case, it's the dragon at north and the dragon at east are the 2 first dragons. They always dive towards the first dive bomb. The third dragon dives towards the second dive bomb. And the 4th and 5th dragon dive towards the 3rd. Now, because the placement of the dragons is random, this can lead to a wide assortment of different patterns for these AoEs. However, these way markers are a way to try to get past this as simply as possible. Essentially, the first dive bomb is going to go to A, and they're only going to move off A when their dive bomb marker disappears. The second player wants to drop theirs at B, the third player wants to drop theirs at C. This is not optimum. There are ways to make this dodge easier, but this is the simplest method requiring the least thought. In 99% of the patterns, this makes for a pretty simple, easy dodge. In 1% of patterns, the person at B is almost certainly going to die, but consider that a sacrifice that you need to make the mechanic easier. For the first player with the dive bomb, they head to A immediately. Second dive bomb marker appears, and as they're waiting to get rid of their dive bomb, H2 here, they're going to get targeted with these 2 puddles targeted at them. All they do is once the first one hits, that's about the time that the dive bomb marker disappears, and they're free to move. They're going to move away. Now, note that the second dive bomb marker, in this case the main tank, they're not going to go to B immediately. They're going to go to the side. The way the timing with their puddles works is the first puddle will hit, and then the second puddle will hit, and that's when their dive bomb marker disappears. So you want to try to position it so that you dodge the first puddle onto the waymark B. About this time, the third dive bomb marker has appeared. They're going to be heading towards C, and now everything's going to collide all at once. It goes in this order. The first dive bomb, then the first part of the quote, the second dive bomb, second part of the quote, third dive bomb. Due middle of the arena should be safe to dodge the dive bombs for as long as you've used ABC for virtually every pattern. So assume that if you can be due middle for the majority of this, then you are safe for almost all of the mechanic. In this combo here, we've got the Dalma Dive into stack. So it'll go the first dive bomb, then the Dalma Dive. Just to show you what happened there, I recommend for this pattern, because it can be a little bit spicy for the player who's dropping the third dive bomb, I strongly recommend having one of your healers do a rescue just to eat them over closer to the party quicker. You get the Dalma Dive and the second dive, and you can see why now that dive was very much going to kill them if they didn't get out of there quickly. And now the second part of the quote, the stack, followed by the third dive bomb. Let's look at what this would have looked like if we had to do the spread instead. Important that the party is spread lightly, but they can't be too near to where those first dive bombs are aiming. You might want to look at the dragons to see where they're going to hit, to have a rough idea how big of an AoE there is to dodge. There is a split second after this where you can move to spread, and you can move towards where that first dive bomb is because there's guaranteed to be no other dive bombs really heading that direction. Second dive bomb goes off, and now it's the Dalma Dive Tank Buster. And everybody's going away from where the third dive bomb's going to hit. If you've survived the dive bombs, everything from this point onwards is easy. In fact, depending on your DPS, this could very well be where you clear this phase. But if the boss is still alive, you get a very soft, long, kind of sort of enrage period. First, the boss is going to do one of those Bahamut's Claw mini tankbusters, and then you're going to get a random quote, but that's it. This quote is going to be one of the ones you've already seen. It's going to combine a in, out, stack, and spread in one order, and you just do the two mechanics with nothing else on top of it. It's a nice reprieve compared to what we've been dealing with. Here it's fire, so the stack, into Hallowed Moon, which is the in, so have the party stack, and then take the in. Because we're going to need our healers alive for a very intense heal check for the phase transition, this is a great time to try to get your healers rezzed if they died during Divebombs and get people topped up. Pray that you don't get many of the stacks, which makes this harder. Here's another mechanic. This time it's spread into out, so lightly spread, and then dodge away from where the boss has jumped to go out. After the two quotes, you still have a Raven's Bink Tankbuster. Again, this requires a swap, and one more Bahamut's Claw mini Tankbuster before Nael will become untargetable, cast Mega Flare, and wipe the party. If you manage to get Nael down to 0% before all of this happens, Nael will jump away, and you can all go stack in the same Neuralink you did for the beginning of the twin phase into Nael phase transition. One thing I haven't mentioned yet, so I'll mention now, you can't use your limit break to help you to kill Nael. To be able to survive the upcoming transition into the third phase, you need a minimum of a tank LB2, and preferably a tank LB3. So, unfortunately, you will have to save your LB and just get the DPS done the old-fashioned way. Anyways, that's all of Nael phase. I hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comment section if you have any questions, tips, or suggestions. Thanks again for watching. Take care.